My name is Sharon Luria. I am a education data reporter for the Associated Press. Thank you for joining us for this Education Writers Association webinar on the upcoming release of the 2024 Nations Report Card, also known as the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, and how reporters can plan nuanced coverage of the data. Ooh. So before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. A reminder that this webinar is on the record and is also being recorded. If you have any questions for our speakers, please type them into the Q&A box. Be sure to include your name and affiliation. Feel free to ask your questions anytime, and we will get to them during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Now let me introduce today's speaker. Ebony Walton is a statistician for the Assessment Division at the National Center for Education Statistics. Grady Wilburn is also a statistician for the Assessment Division at the National Center for Education Statistics, and Martin West is Academic Dean and Henry Lee Shattuck Professor of Education, Harvard Graduate School of Education, and Vice Chair of the National Assessment Governing Board. Marty, Ebony, and Grady will now start us off with a presentation.
Great, we'll get the slides up. Thank you, Sharon, for that introduction. And as the slides are coming, I'll tell you that we often summarize the mission of the National Assessment of Educational Progress as telling the stories of American students' achievement over time and in context. And we're trying to tell those stories in a way that will help the public broadly understand what's happening with student learning. But you all, the media, are really our first audience and the main avenue by which we're able to accomplish that mission. So we really appreciate your interest in these results and look forward to your coverage. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that we often refer to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, as the acronym has it, as the nation's report card, because it really is the only common yardstick that measures and reports on the progress of education in the United States in a way that makes it possible to compare what students know and are able to do from one jurisdiction to another, and in particular to make comparisons across state lines. So the results that will be released at the end of this month will have results for math and reading at grades 4 and grade 8 for the nation as a whole, for each state, as well as jurisdictions like Puerto Rico and the Department of Defense Education Activity Schools, and then for 26 urban school districts that voluntarily participate in something known as the Trial Urban District Assessment. And we're grateful to those districts for their commitment to really providing transparency into how their students are performing over time. One thing to be aware of, though, is that NAEP does not provide school level or student level results. In fact, no individual student takes the entire NAEP exam. Rather, each student takes portions of it in a way that allows us to generate aggregate data for the nation and for jurisdictions like states and large districts. But we don't get individual level or school level results. That's the role of state and local testing systems. If we go to the next slide, you'll see I'm here as part of this panel on behalf of the National Assessment Governing Board. That is an independent, nonpartisan board comprising 26 state and local representatives that sets policy for the NAEP. So we're responsible for activities such as setting the content frameworks for the assessments that determine what will be included when we test each subject, setting the achievement levels that define what students should know and be able to do within those subjects. We, subject to constraints in our authorizing legislation, we set this schedule for assessments. That legislation does require us to test students in math and reading in 4th and 8th grade every 2 years. And so this release is part of that required set of assessments. And then we play a role in releasing the events releasing the results like we will on January 29th. So let me now then hand it off to Grady, I believe, from NCES, who NCES is our partner in conducting the NAEP program that we work very closely in partnership with as the governing board.
Thanks, Marty, and hello, everyone. So my name is Grady. Like Ebony, we are representing the National Center for Education Statistics as statisticians. We host and do several surveys, some international surveys, some data collections that look at other key education indicators. But today we're specifically talking about NAEP, or the National Assessment of Educational Progress. When it comes to NAEP, our role is the assessment administration. So we're the ones going out to help collect those data via our field staff. We are collecting and analyzing those data. And then we are the ones who are responsible for making sure these data stay embargoed. And the embargoed briefings are given to those people who partner with us to share these data widely, as well as to media, so we can make sure that they get their stories right and are in those newspapers the day of the release. Finally, we also make sure that we are maintaining data credibility via our contractors and NCS, that the analysis procedures that we use are up to date. We have several expert panels that help us maintain that innovative but standard way of reporting data, since we have to adhere to certain statistics, given that we are a statistical agency. Next slide. So we're going to get a little bit into how we report the NAEP results. I imagine several of you all are familiar with the NAEP reports, but several of you all may not be. And next slide, the main way that we report these results are scale scores. So one way to report students' NAEP results is through these scale scores, which are derived from student responses to the test questions that summarize the overall level of performance attained by those students. And like Marty mentioned a moment ago, it is important to note that NAEP is not designed to report individual test scores. We just report test scores at the student level, at the student group level. But these scale scores are very helpful in using to compare over time in particular, but also across the jurisdictions and among some of the selected student groups that we do have reliable samples for. And I think I'm going to pass it over to Marty to go through the achievement levels.
Yeah, so NCS produces the scale scores. In order to try to give meaning to those scale scores, one of the things the governing board does is to define achievement levels that set out expectations for what students know and are able to do. There are three achievement levels: NAEP Basic, NAEP Proficient, and NAEP Advanced. You can see how we describe them on the slide. The one thing I want to emphasize in talking about the achievement levels is that you should not think of it as the equivalent of grade level proficiency, despite the similarity in the term. NAEP Proficient and proficiency is often used in the context of state or district assessments. Grade level performance is really defined based on the standards, the content standards that are set by states, and what we are not trying to replicate that or replace that in our work in setting achievement levels as the governing board. So let's go to the next slide. In order to sort of give more granularity to what the results mean, we've done some work to try to develop descriptors of what students who are assigned that label, NAEP Basic, NAEP Proficient, or NAEP Advanced, are able to do. So for example, you can see in grade 4 math, a student who is below basic would struggle to locate whole numbers on a number line, while her peer who achieves that basic level would be able to demonstrate that ability, whereas a grade 4 student in math at the NAEP Advanced level would be able to do things like use inverse operations and simple ratios. And these are just selected examples. You can, at the link that is provided on the slide, which we can circulate, you can find much additional information about how to characterize students' achievement levels. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that in addition to reporting the average scale scores and the percentage of students who are achieving at the basic level, the proficient level, and the advanced level. We also feature in the NAEP reporting what students who are at different percentile levels of the distribution of achievement in a given grade level are able to do. And so we specifically report students at the 10th percentile, the 25th percentile, the median or the 50th percentile, the 75th and the 90th. We characterize the 10th and the 25th percentile as lower performing students, and then the top two categories as higher performing students. And that allows us to understand not just what's going on in terms of averages, but how the distribution of achievement and gaps between higher and lower performing students are evolving over time. And I mention that in part because as we turn now to giving you a sense of what we've seen in recent NAEP results releases, you'll see that in order to understand what's happened in the past decade plus, you really need to look beyond averages. So as I said, we try to help people understand the stories of American achievement in context. And part of that context is what's happened historically. And obviously, there's been a lot of attention to the issue of pandemic learning loss, changes in students' learning in the wake of the COVID-19 school closures. But we think it's important to actually call attention to the longer term trend, what had been happening in the decade leading up to the pandemic. And you see here that if you look across these grades and subject areas that we test most frequently, 4th and 8th grade math and reading, if you had looked at what happened in terms of student achievement from 2009 to 2019 and focused only on the average student, you would have seen that grade 8 math scores ticked down a little bit, grade 4 reading scores ticked up a little bit, but essentially you'd see a picture of stagnation. And while that's true on average, what that sort of picture of stagnation was obscuring is that we saw an increase in inequality in students' achievement over this decade-long period, where you saw consistent declines in student learning among lower performing students, and then increases at the top of the achievement distribution, reflecting higher levels of inequality in student learning. Then, of course, we had the ability in 2022 to look at what happened over the course of the pandemic. We were not able to administer the NAEP assessments in 2021 as a result of the pandemic conditions, but we were back in the field in 2022, and we saw very substantial, historically unprecedented declines in students' achievement. Here you see the results for math. Because math is a subject where we've seen actually quite substantial progress in students' achievement over the longer term, we see that scores in 2022 were still higher than they were in 1990 when this particular NAEP assessment was first launched, but you see those quite substantial declines between 2019 and 2022. Then if you go to the next slide, we can see the results for reading, and you'll see that the declines in reading were also evident in both 4th and 8th grade because reading is a subject where we haven't seen as much improvement in students' achievement over time. Really now in 2022, rather, scores were indistinguishable from when we first began giving the NAEP reading assessment in the early 1990s. So now I think I'll turn the floor back to Ebony and Grady to give you a little more specific sense of what to expect on the 29th.
Thank you, Marty. Hello, everyone. I'm Ebony Walton again from NCES, and I appreciate Marty's recap of all of the major patterns that we have been reporting over the last decade or so. And these results are critical for helping our stakeholders understand what's happening across the country. That is why we consider NAEP as not only a gold standard, but a common metric or a common yardstick So at the center, we administer the assessment, we collect the data, we score, and we scale them. In this case, like our other 4th and 8th grade math and reading assessments, we've assessed over close to 500,000 students across the country. And NCES then collates this information, verifies that these data are accurate, and then we produce these results in what we have as the nation's report card, which you can find at thenationsreportcard.gov. The commissioner of the Center, National Center of Education Statistics, will release these data at 12:01 a.m. on January 29th. So there's so much data. Marty just, gave you the tip of the iceberg of all of the results that you can find. But in this case, we are focused on grades 4 and 8, mathematics and reading performance of students at a national, state, and those 26 tutor districts that participate in NAEP. In addition to the cognitive results, we also provide hundreds of responses to surveys that we provide to students, teachers, and school administrators to help contextualize the findings. The reason why I'm kind of underscoring the magnitude of the data is because we want to provide a product that is useful for our major stakeholders, which include you as the media. In that light, we have revamped the report cards for this upcoming release so that you can be able to tell those data stories easier. Not only will we be emphasizing those average score changes, which are very important measures of change over time, but we also are elevating those performances of lower performing students and higher performing students because they're critical to really understand what's happening across the education landscape. In the new report cards, we're going to have 4 major sections. The first will be a national trends and student skills section. Here you're going to be able to see results for the nation on average across those percentile levels. You're also going to see achievement level results, how students are performing at or above NAEP Basic or at or above NAEP Proficient over time. And to bring it home a little bit better, we're also presenting results of how students answered particular items on the assessment. So you get a handle of students in the advanced range, what types of skills are they actually demonstrating in 2024? And has that performance for that particular skill changed between 22 and 2024? So all of that is in the National Trends and Student Skills section. The second section will be a lot of interactive charts. Actually, can you take me to the next slide, the previous slide, please? Thank you. The state and district trends section provides maps that show you how states and these tutor performance has changed over time. Yes, we highlight the 22 to 24 change, but you have the ability to go back in in our trends to choose the interval of interest. As Marty showed you, we are seeing some things pre-pandemic. So maybe you want to look at how the 24 results compared to 2009. You're able to do that here. There's a lot of information, not only average score changes, but again, how are higher and lower performing student performance changing within these jurisdictions. All of that information is going to be at your fingertips. The third section looks at student groups. By law, we have to present results by students' race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, various variables. And so we provide results for those student groups in this section. You can look at those results for the nation, across the states, and the tutors. And again, we emphasize not only their average performance, but our lower and higher performing students within those groups making change. All of that will be presented there in that section. The last major section, apart from the About section, which is important if you want more details about the assessment, is our Opportunities in Education section. Here's where we highlight contextual factors that have trends. So one major factor is student absenteeism, and we do have a survey question that touches on that. We'll be reporting how student absenteeism has changed since 2019, along with a few other contextual factors. And again, you can find that information nationally, And then we also look at how lower and higher performing students contextually differ as well. All of that is there in the report card. Next slide. So this is just a mock-up. This is not real data. This is just a fake mock-up to try to illustrate to you the types of information you can find in the report card on the 29th. So in this case, for any student group, you're able to see how the average score changed. It gives you a quick summary, in addition to how lower performing students at the 25th percentile score has changed and those higher performing students at the 75th. If you click on that student group, you get more details, a more detailed graph, so you can really understand how these scores are moving over time. And now I turn it to Dr. Wilburn.
Thank you. So when you all get access to the embargo, and I'm seeing a lot of questions that I'll try to answer now, and then also when we get to Q&A, you will get access to the report card and all the features that Ebony just mentioned. There will be a presentation that we have used previously to brief some of the state and district representatives that you will have access to, our press release, as well as the governing board's press release. We are producing some short videos to summarize the results. I'm not sure those will be available then, but if they are available, you'll have access to those. You guys hopefully already have received a media advisory that is letting you know the embargo briefing is occurring on the 28th and how to access that briefing. FAQs will be on the embargo site, technical FAQs as well as media FAQs that address many of the questions that we often get year to year. So if you do have a question, I do suggest you check there first. If not, feel free to email us. Social media content is a great way of keeping up with the next release and some of the findings that we pulled out that we thought you all may be interested in understanding. And then we are going to have a one-pager, which I often joke is often 2 pages, which will cover each grade subject, giving you the bullets and a very high-level findings. Next slide, please. And so like I mentioned, the embargoed media briefing is January 28th, which is the day before the release. During that briefing, you will hear from the Executive Director, Leslie Muldoon. You will also hear from NCES Commissioner Becky Carr, who will give a very short statement and then open it up for questions. The hope is that you've had the opportunity to go through the embargo materials, which you will receive access to on January 27th, usually around noon, maybe a little earlier. So the hope is that you've gone through those materials and maybe you have a couple of questions in which you could get answers from Peggy or Leslie, or if you want quotes from Peggy or Leslie, that's a good time to do it. Let's see, make sure I covered everything. The form that you will fill out will include the agreement to abide to the embargo process. That's very important. We want to make sure that these results don't get out before 12:01 on January 29th. Yeah, and I think that's it for this slide. Next slide, please. And I think this is back
I think
to
this
Marty.
is back to me, Grady. Yeah. So hopefully you've gotten a sense of some of the things you can do with NAEP data and how to go about getting access to it. We thought we would close the presentation portion of this session with some advice about what not to do, some pitfalls to avoid. We actually have a term for this that emerged somehow on social media and stuck. It's often referred to as misnapery. And that starts with confusing causation and correlation. Just because scores are higher one place than another, we can't necessarily attribute that difference to any particular difference between those jurisdictions. For example, it turns out to be the case that students on average achieve at higher levels in states with stronger teachers unions, but one wouldn't want to conclude as a result of that pattern that unions are the cause of higher achievement. A related pitfall along the same lines as of rushing to strong causal inferences is just finding a state that does something you like, seems to be higher performing, and assuming that's the reason. Obviously, you want to be looking across all of the data that's available. The scores that NCS reports are not designed to be averaged across subjects or grade levels or combined in any sort of numerical sense. We discourage coverage from equating a given change or difference in NAEP scale scores with a specific amount of instructional time, either a grade level or a year or month of learning. You need to be paying attention to issues of statistical significance when making comparisons over time or across student groups. Just because there's a numerical difference doesn't mean that that difference is statistically significant and isn't likely to have occurred as a result of chance. I would say conversely, if a difference is not statistically significant, that doesn't necessarily mean that that it isn't substantively significant. It could be the result of a relatively small sample size. And then finally, just to reiterate a point I made earlier, NAEP proficiency is not the same thing as how states define grade level performance. So let me stop there and hand things over to Sharon and say that I think we all look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you so much. So I'll get started with a couple of questions, and then while people type their questions into the Q&A chat, and then I'll move on to picking questions from that chat. So I think that, the first thing that is going to be on a lot of people's minds is that we are having a new administration in just a few days. And so can you talk about whether there's any expectation that the new presidential administration will have some effect on NAEP in terms of, how it's administered, the results being reported, or anything else?
I have no reason to expect that the status or role of NAEP will change with the new administration. I think the NAEP program has been and as is the National Assessment Governing Board is bipartisan in its design and nonpartisan in its operations. By that I mean we have representatives from both parties and we have prior experience under the Trump administration, and the NAEP program remained, a steady force from 2016 to 2020. So I don't see any reason to expect dramatic changes.
In addition, we need to point out the law and that NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, is a data collection that is required by law. So if there are any changes, it would have to be a legal one. And at this time, it's still in effect. And NCES and the governing board have a role for administering NAEP.
Another question I'd like to ask is there any underreported aspect of NAEP data or data trend that you would like reporters to shed some light on? Something that perhaps is a really interesting part of a really interesting data point that NAEP shares that isn't reported on so often?
I think what we've been reiterating over and over and again, I believe that the coverage is starting to pick up some, is to move beyond the average score. It's very simple to say, your state scored higher than this state or that state. But it's important, as we've been talking about, to look at how lower performing students are doing and higher performing students are doing, because that average score may not tell you the full gamut of student performance trends. That's probably our biggest point. And that's something that you're going to see in our messaging over and over again. Hopefully it's not overkill, but we really do need to shed light on our lower performing students and how they're performing over time, as well as our higher performing students. That's the biggest area that I can think of.
If I could just add to that, we have a treasure trove of questions that we ask students, teachers, and schools. And the questions that we ask them these aren't the assessment questions, these are about their educational environment, are available now. So you can see the questions that you will get data on January 29th. I'll give the link to, I think, maybe Steph or someone who could then share the link with you all so that you can go to the website and you can see all the questions that are asked to students, to teachers in schools. And maybe while you're looking through there, you'll find a question that you'd like to dig a little bit deeper on.
Could you give an example of like one of the questions that's asked of teachers or students?
Sure. We asked teachers about how many times have they been absent during the school year. So one of the things we like to look into pre-pandemic and before pandemic is how teachers are weathering this kind of COVID experience that happened. And looking at the news and reading the news, you'll notice that a lot of teachers have retired. A lot of schools are having problems recruiting teachers. And one of the reasons is how are teachers feeling and coping with this? And so we have a list of questions that, kind of get at this. We have questions we ask students about, books and home and some of the SES questions. I think that we combined in an index that Ebony maybe talk about at some other point. We have school questions that ask about chronic absenteeism this year. When the COVID pandemic happened, we had a whole block of questions that asked strictly about measures to help combat COVID. High dosage tutoring, are you extending the school year, retention? So things like that I think could help tell a wider story, which we're trying to help tell about the context and how the education environment looks now compared to maybe what it looked like pre the pandemic in 2020.
So I'm seeing a couple questions that talk about sort of the how the test itself is given, namely roughly what percentage of fourth and eighth graders in every city or state take it, how long do they sit for the test, and when did they actually take it, what time of the year?
Let me take a crack at that. So the time of the year the students take the test, this is 2024, so this would be between January and March. There's a 6-week period there between January and March, late January, early March, where the students took the assessment. The assessment consists of 2 30-minute cognitive blocks and then a 15-minute questionnaire. So I think total we have the students between 90 and 120 minutes, depending on, training and orientation to the equipment, completing the question, and then them leaving. The percent of students in the city or the state who participate on the assessment, I don't think I can give you the exact percent. What we do is make sure that the sample adequately reflects those demographics that Ebony mentioned earlier, proportional to that area, to that jurisdiction. I think in the TUDA districts, I think it's between 900 and 1,400 students per grade subject. For the states, I think it's probably somewhere between 17 and 2,300 per grade subject. Obviously, the larger states may have bigger numbers and the smaller states may have smaller numbers. But what's important to understand is the sample that we collect adequately reflects that jurisdiction, or else we couldn't reliably report those estimates in the reports.
Another quick point, students are taking the assessment in a digital form. It's not paper. We've moved to digital devices in 2017, particularly for this assessment. So students are engaging in a reading passage, or they're engaging in math items using tablets for the most part. So it is an interactive assessment, not a simple paper and pencil assessment.
Thomas Wilburn from Chalkbeat asks, for reporters who are using the API to pull down data, will those API endpoints also be available during the embargoed period, same as the rest of the data?
We will have to check, but that seems likely.
Anna Mitchell asks, could you direct us to a resource for sorting out whether changes are statistically significant?
Can I take a crack at that, Ebony and Grady? Because it gives me a chance to sort of praise your work, but also sort of provide a little bit of context. So the report card itself does an very good job of highlighting which results, that is either changes in scores over time or differences between student groups are and are not statistically significant. So if you see an actual sort of number on the screen characterizing a given difference or change, then you can be confident that that result is statistically significant. I think the challenge is actually the sort of flip side of that, where you don't see a change over time, for example, that reaches levels of statistical significance, but wouldn't necessarily want to conclude that you're confident that nothing is going on there. So let me give you an example. It could be that a district achievement changed in the 2022 results by the same amount as was seen for the nation as a whole. But because, as Ebony just noted, the results, the sample sizes are, I guess it was Grady just noted, the sample sizes are smaller in the districts than obviously for the nation as a whole, then that change didn't sort of reach levels of statistical significance. So you want to be cautious about concluding that a place where you don't see a change has necessarily held steady or has not experienced a change that has shown up for the nation as a whole.
May I add just one piece? That was a great point, Marty. And another reason why I'm dissuading the emphasis on average scale scores. If you look at our NAEP Data Explorer, if you want to dig more into our data, we do provide confidence intervals. So that really shows you our confidence in the estimate that we provide for whatever student group or whatever state you have. Those confidence intervals can range 4, 5, 6 points. So while we report one score for your state, the actual confidence band around that score is wide, and it can be wide, depending on the size of the sample. So that's just another piece as well. The average scale score is a nice reporting tool for simplicity, but just know that there's an error bar around those numbers.
So we have a couple of different questions about understanding the difference between like a proficiency level and what they mean versus saying something's on grade level. Ralph Birch asks if it's fair to say the proficiency levels are subjective, and Lutz Fernandez asks for advice on how to help readers avoid confusion and if there's research showing whether NAEP standards tend to be higher than grade level standards. I do know that NAEP has a mapping tool which compares the proficiency standard, what proficient means on NAEP versus what the standard is in every state. Is that something that reporters can use to better understand exactly what this all means?
Yes, let me jump in very quickly on the initial question. Is it fair to say that the proficiency levels are subjective? I would say that there is some subjectivity in their definition, but they are far from arbitrary, right? They were set through a very elaborate and deliberative standard setting process with lots of input from educators and experts in the different academic content areas, and then ultimately approved by the governing board. So I think subjective is too strong a word, though obviously those judgment was involved. I think and then maybe Grady or Ebony will want to say a little bit about how NCS helps us understand how they, in practical terms, differ from states' definitions.
Sure. So, and I will share a link in the chat that looks at this, but we do what's called a state mapping study, and where we look at the percent of students in a state and what that state reported to be proficient, and then compare it to NAEP and what NAEP reported to be at NAEP. I'm sorry, let me back that up. So you have what state proficient is, and we take whatever that percent was, say it's 40%, and we go top to down until we get to 40% of students in that state on NAEP. And then what we can do is we can see how the percent proficient in your state, how that maps to a NAEP scale score. And so every single state is given what's called a NAEP equivalent score. And that NAEP equivalent score is taking the state proficiency, what they said was their proficient on their state test, and giving it a NAEP score. Given that, you can not only compare across jurisdictions to see how state proficiencies may vary across states, but you can also look over time to see how states may have adjusted their cutoff for proficiency. And that provides an avenue to not only see how much more difficult NAEP proficient may be compared to your state proficient, or in some cases, that NAEP proficient is right on board or right on line with what a state is saying proficient. I will end with saying that it appears that most states' cutoff for proficient is somewhere between basic and proficient. Very few are proficient, very few are below basic. Most of them are right there in the middle.
We also have several questions about talking about this gap between high and low performers. Keelan Belsha asks, do you have any suggestions for researchers we could talk to understand why the gap has grown? And Erica Meltzer asks, what factors might be contributing to that gap between high and low performers? What questions should we be asking about the trend? So getting more into basically the why behind the trend.
So that's a big question, and I'm not sure that we can sort of do justice to it as part of this conversation. In terms of researchers to talk to, Sean Reardon at Stanford and Tom Kane at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, my colleague, have been doing a lot of work on achievement trends and differences in particular in the post-pandemic era, and could be good sources. I think one thing I would say is that as we look for the possible explanations, we should be looking both within schools and out of schools. I think oftentimes when we analyze NAEP data and trends, we think, the main driver has to be what's going on in schools, when really assessments like NAEP are measuring what schools are contributing to student learning, but really also what all of society is contributing to student learning. And when you see sort of different groups of students who are often in the same school environments and experiencing the same trends in school curricula, say, moving in different directions, that even strengthens the case for looking at factors that could be beyond the schoolhouse door. So, I haven't seen a lot of evidence supporting, direct evidence supporting this, but I'm very interested in the role of screen time and social media and the like in explaining some of what we've seen in recent years.
Well said, Marty, actually. That was really good. A long time ago, over a decade ago, NCS published a report that looked at the achievement gap between Black and white students. And it's called like a decomposition of the gap. And it looked at, I think like the gap sizes are always around 30 points or so. And they broke it down to show, like 5 points are attributed to factors within schools, but, X amount of points are between schools or vice versa. I appreciate that kind of dichotomy that you need to consider what's happening both within and outside of school. And we've seen, we've had some evidence, and we do agree that your researchers that you mentioned are another good source. That was good.
Since you mentioned factors beyond the schoolhouse door, are any of the questions that are asked on that student survey about those kinds of factors, asking about screen time or personal things happening in student life, things like that?
I'll give you one example that's unfortunately from a slightly different data collection, something called the long-term trend NAEP. That asks, for example, about students' reading habits, which is, influenced probably by what's going on in schools, but also is influenced and captures something broader than that. And we've seen major declines in the share of students who report reading at home for fun over the past couple of decades. And yes, there are other examples as well. I think the surveys, it's fair to say, are focused primarily on what's happening in schools, but also give you some sense.
Yeah. And the long-term trend, that's a separate thing. So that's not coming out on January 29th. That'll be
That is not
later.
coming out on January 29th.
Bulgan Vargas asks, were there any changes made to NAEP? What % of students that participated were English language learners?
Why don't I take a crack at that one? As far as changes made to the assessment, we often refresh questions, but the item pool will generally stay the same, measuring the same underlying concepts. A change in the administration, however, was we are now using both Microsoft Surface Pros and Chromebooks, whereas before we were just using Microsoft Surface Pros. And we probably should have pointed that out. That's one of the reasons these results are not coming out earlier in or late 2024, where they usually come out versus January 29th, because we had to take the time to make sure that we could bridge those assessments from Microsoft Surface Pros to Chromebooks, which we did successfully. And that's what Ebony is also pointing out. If you read the About section in the report card, you can get some more detail on that. As far as the percent of students who were English learners, I'd have to take another look, but from what I remember, it hasn't changed that much from what it was, over the last several years. I think it's somewhere around maybe 13% in grade 4, maybe a little bit lower in grade 8, but I'd have to look up those numbers to get you an exact number. So don't quote me on those.
Or you could go to nationsreportcard.gov, go to our math report card, and you'll find the percentage there. We provided there.
Anna Mitchell asks, were kids tested in schools with administrators they know, and were they in a group or individual?
So the way the test administration works is we have our own field staff come out and they actually administer the assessment, but there is a representative from the school, which is usually a teacher, that is in the classroom with them. That is unless they have an accommodation, which requires them to have the testing with somebody familiar or to test in a room by themselves or one-on-one or in small groups. But typically in a NAEP session, there are about 15 to 20 students in a classroom that are completing the NAEP assessment together.
And those students are randomly selected, right? Like the admin can't pick, oh, these kids are going to take the test.
That's correct, randomly selected.
Mm-hmm. Are private schools also included in the assessment?
So yes, private schools are included in the sample. One of our challenges over time, and so their achievement is reflected in the national level results. One of the challenges we've had over time is, though, achieving adequate school participation rates among the private schools. And so in recent releases, we have at times not been in a position to release results for private schools as a whole, but we have enough of their participation to be able to sort of use them when characterizing achievement nationwide. We typically are able to report results for the largest private school system in the United States, which are Catholic schools. So you'll see that reflected nationwide. And then the other thing related to that is that when you see results for specific states, those are public school students only. So when we're characterizing the nation's schools, that's public and private, but at the state level, that is public school only.
And the tutors and the districts, yep.
Yes.
For the latest mapping studies, for the mapping study, I see the link was just posted. How recently did you complete the mapping? It looks like on the page it says 2022. Is that going to be updated for 2024?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the latest state mapping study is based on 2022 NAEP data, and the 2022 state standards that were, the standards that were in place at that time. And so it could be the case that state standards have evolved since that study was conducted. And in particular, there's been some reporting suggesting that some states lowered their definitions of proficiency in the wake of the pandemic. And so that would be something that would need to be sort of investigated in your reporting when trying to make use of that data.
And NCES will provide the 2024 results when we have received the data to do the mapping for 2024. So that will be part of an NCS site, and we'll make sure that the tool will be updated as well.
Matt Barnum asks, to what extent should changes between 2022 and now be interpreted as evidence of academic recovery or lack thereof since the pandemic? I ask because the cohorts of students tested are, of course, different between then and now.
I think, Matt, that there's always different cohorts of students that are being compared. So when you look at the 2024 results versus 2022 results, I think that now more than maybe ever, it's important to understand where these 2024 students were when the pandemic was declared. The fourth graders were just finishing up kindergarten, and I think the eighth graders were just finishing up fourth grade when schools closed down for the most part. And then that next year, for the most part, schools were closed. And what many schools have told us that even that school year 21-22, things weren't quite back to normal, and things are just now starting to get back to normal. So I think that context is very important. But I do think you make a good point, and when you are comparing year to year, to consider those sort of just contextual changes, student group changes when kind of explaining or trying to help your reader understand the results.
And so, Marty, you mentioned earlier that these results, these proficiency levels and everything, it's not arbitrary, right? So can you talk more about how does the governing board actually decide what subjects are important and necessary for students to know, what skills should be the standards, and what should be tested for on this assessment?
Yeah, so there are two parts of that. One is figuring out which subject areas to assess, and then how do we define the knowledge and skills within each of those subject areas. Congress does some of the deciding for us when it comes to subject areas. So they say we need to test students in math and reading nationally and state by state every 2 years in these grade levels. And then they, appropriate funds that the governing board then can use to test in other subject areas. And I would say we bring our own perspectives as board members, many of whom are educators themselves. We get input from the field and from organizations representing important stakeholders of the education sector. And we use that advice to develop within the constraints of our budget the most informative and balanced set of assessments that we can. And then, in those subject areas that we've decided to assess, we have to develop the frameworks for the assessments, and that is really done in partnership with experts in that field. So we sort of put together a panel that drafts the framework that we ultimately approve.
We have a couple minutes left. Is there anyone else who wants to raise their hand and ask a question or is typing something into the chat? Okay,
Can
so
I add one thing?
oh yeah, great.
Sorry. I didn't completely answer Matt's question, and I'm reading it now. I didn't answer the part about recovery. I think that's going to be a storyline when these results come out. Our students, our group's average scores now in 2024 back to where they were in 2019. Like we've been emphasizing, please look beyond the average score. Look at student groups, look at states, look at districts, because it may not be what a lot of people are going to call recovery. It may not be an even recovery. And so like we've been talking about the story with the higher performers going one way and the lower performers going one way, going the other way. That may be the case now. So I just encourage you when you are talking about recovery to go beyond the average score as best you can in your articles.
I would also ask a question, is there a way for reporters to see sample questions that were on the NAEP so that they can give their readers a sense of what these proficiency levels actually mean?
Absolutely. If you go to nationsreportcard.gov, we have the NAEP questions tool that actually provides released items over the years, including our digital items as well. So again, you can kind of see the interactivity that students have to perform to answer various items. And we also feature them in our report card. So they'll be all there for you.
You guys have, spoken extensively about the need to look beyond the averages and look at the differences between different percentile groups, and also about, mishaps to avoid and misnapery to avoid. Is there anything else that you would add as just advice to journalists about how they can approach this story and the sorts of interesting, insights that they can get from this data?
I guess the one thing I would say is that obviously we've focused this conversation on what to expect on January 29th, and we hope that you will all write stories that appear that morning. But we hope that that is not the full extent of the coverage that is inspired by NAEP data, and that oftentimes just the headline result scores are up here or down there could really be the I don't know, the starting line for a more detailed analysis aimed at trying to understand what's going on, what could be contributing to those changes, rather than the last word.
I agree. And I will say there's only so much you can cover during the release day. There's so much data that should be mined over the months to come. And we provide hopefully a powerful resource for you to do those data digging, that data mining. And we're also available to assist in your investigations post-release as well. It's a lot of data. I'm not lying about that, okay? So please feel free to use us as a resource in addition to what you will find at nationsreportcard.gov.
I just want to break in. My name is Steph Smith. I'm the content director at EWA, and I'm so sorry my camera is not working. It's lovely to see you all. I want to thank Sharon for so expertly moderating this discussion. I want to thank our panelists, Ebony, Grady, and Marty, for a terrific conversation and for sharing all this information. I did just put a link to an evaluation of this webinar in the chat. Please take it. We take your feedback very seriously to improve our programming. And I will also be emailing everyone on this call with a link to the slides and with a link to the evaluation there as well. We are at time, and again, thank you so much. I appreciate all the members who attended, and thanks so much. That concludes today's webinar.
Thanks.